Good morning, everyone. Today, we're going to be talking about securing your Java web apps and APIs with Microsoft Identity. So here's the agenda for today. We're going to start with what is identity, dive into authentication and authorization, and then I'm going to give you an overview of the Microsoft Authentication Libraries, MSAL. Then we're going to shift our focus to MSAL Java specifically. After that, I'm going to demo 3 of the samples we have online and ready for you. And lastly, I'm going to show you our new and improved Java sample organization, and to also show you the wealth of our samples. After that, we'll have a question and answer session for you all. So starting with identity, we need to start with an app. The app needs to find out who the user is and if they're allowed to use this application. Most applications need to access resources by calling an API. The app asks Microsoft Identity for tokens. You need an ID token to identify the user and an access token to authorize the user. The identity provider, Microsoft Identity in this case, takes care of authentication for the application. The app requests an ID token from MS Identity to authenticate the user, and then an access token to authorize the user. Authentication is to prove that you are who you say you are. For example, I might show my driver's license to my bank to prove that I am who I claim to be. Authorization takes place after you've been authenticated. Authorization is to check that you have permission to access a specific resource. At the bank, I only have permission to access bank accounts that I am a listed owner, whether it's my personal account or an account shared with a family member, for example. Notice, it's a private conversation between the user and the identity platform. This is good because you don't want the developer of the application to be able to see your own personal information, such as your credentials. So this is also done on a web service, which allows the identity provider to perform any kind of authentication needed, such as username and password, multi-factor authentication, or others. The private conversation generates artifacts left on the machine, such as a cookie. So next time the user makes an authorization or authentication request, they don't need to type in their password or use MFA again. Cookies do expire, though. How soon they expire correlates with the sensitivity of the data. For example, when banking online, you tend to get logged out after about 10 minutes of inactivity. Other apps like YouTube never log you out. Additionally, the cookie allows for single sign-on, so you don't have to re-enter your password when you want to access data on another app that is connected to the first application you logged into. To be clear, let's say you log into Outlook and decide a few minutes later that you want to access some of your PowerPoint documents, you're not prompted to enter your password again. So after authentication, you receive an identity token. This is what we call a JSON Web Token, and it's encrypted. This is so people can't intercept the token and try to change the claims. However, when we decrypt it, this is what the token looks like. So first, you can see type at the top. JWT stands for JSON Web Token, sometimes referred to as a JOT. And then you have more information, such as the issuer is the IDP that the app trusts. You can see the audience, which is your own application. And you can also see EXP, as in when the token is going to expire, IAT as in issued at time. And there are even more claims. And the claims are about how long the token is valid for. But then you also have claims that tell you information about the user. The application needs this user info, so they get the object ID and decide what needs to be displayed and guides the user experience. So now the app requests an access token, so the IDP sends the access token if the app is authorized to call the API. So now the app has an ID token and an access token for Microsoft Graph, the protected API. The app makes a call to MS Graph, and so it sends over the access token to the API. The API validates the JOT signature and extracts the claims to figure out how to handle the request. So to recap, you need an identity token to prove that you are who you say you are. And then you need an access token to make sure that you're getting permission to access resources that you actually are supposed to have access to. Now we're going to talk about Microsoft Identity. It's how you build applications and integrate identity with one unified toolkit. The platform helps you build applications to sign in users and access resources and external applications such as Microsoft Office 365, the Azure portal, and thousands of other software as a service applications. It also helps you access internal resources, such as apps on your corporate network and intranet, along with any cloud apps developed by your own organization. It also allows developers to build applications that users and customers can sign into using social accounts like Facebook and Google. MSAL, Microsoft Authentication Library, is a set of libraries that includes JavaScript, .NET, Android, Java, and many more. MSAL enables you to acquire tokens from the Microsoft Identity Platform to authenticate users and access web apps, web APIs, mobile, desktop, and more. Its purpose is to help authenticate and authorize users and apps. MSAL supports various OAuth flows like authorization code flow and client credential flow, and many more. MSAL acquires tokens on behalf of the user. It maintains a token cache and refreshes them for you when they're close to expiring, so you don't have to worry about getting a new one. It helps you specify which audience you want your applications to sign in. This can be your work, your school, your org, social identities of Azure, Azure AD B2C, business to consumer, and more. Here are the scenarios that MSAL Java covers: web apps, web APIs, desktop apps, and more. No matter what application you have, we can protect you. So now, bear with me. I am starting up the Spring Boot server, and I'm going to show you a Spring Boot demo. So some of the steps in our sample include actually registering the application, cloning the GitHub repo, but I've already done some of those, but I'll quickly gloss over some of the steps in the beginning. So I'm navigating to Azure Active Directory. I'm going to my app registrations. Now, in your case, if you've not registered an app to Azure AD before, you don't have a tenant. And so you would simply click New Registration and follow the steps in our samples. And then you also get a tenant if you didn't already have one. And if you already had a tenant, when you register a new application, it would automatically be part of that tenant or a different one if you specify. So let's start with the Java Spring Web App. So when you create an application, you get sent to the overview page for the app you just made. You have information like your app ID, client ID, directory, sometimes known as tenant ID. And then another step that I've already done is create an app secret. All you have to do is click New Client Secret, hit the name, and choose how long it lasts for. Mind you, though, you need to make sure that you store the secret in a safe place, because after creating it, you won't be able to retrieve it. We present it like this. Going back to the overview page, I created an app that's been registered in Azure. And to create a relationship of trust between my application and the identity platform, this is why I've done this. On the overview page for that registered app in Azure, you can see its client ID and my tenant ID, which will allow my application to uniquely identify my registered app and access the identity platform using MSAL. You can also see I created a client secret to establish another layer of security. So now, paying attention to our client ID and tenant ID, I'm going to show you some of the code in our configuration files that we're going to have to change. You have to go to your YAML file. So I'm going to change my screen. So here, you can see my YAML file, and I've updated the tenant ID, client ID, and client secret to correspond with the app I was just showing you in Azure AD. So now I'm going to open up an incognito browser and go to localhost 8080. As you can see, I'm taken to a page that I'm not signed in. If I try to use the button on the right to sign in, it will go smoothly. Attempts to go to a protected page, such as ID token details, will result in automatic redirection to the MS Identity Platform sign-in page. So I enter my credentials. Multi-factor authentication. And now you can see the ID token details. As I showed you during the slides, you can see that it was issued by Microsoft. See my name, my object ID. You can also see the subject and audience. And if I click on sign in status, the message here is different. When we first got to localhost 8080, it told us that we needed to be signed in to access the ID token details page, and that would automatically redirect us. Now it just says you're signed in. We sign out. And that completes the Spring demo. So now I'm going to change my screen, and we're going to look at using Tomcat. So going back to my tenant, we're going to look at a Java servlet web app. Like in Spring, we have my client ID, my tenant ID, and I have my secret. So now I'm going to navigate back to Visual Studio Code to show you what I need to change in my configuration files. So as you can see, we take our client ID, our secret, and then we add on the tenant ID to the end of login.microsoftonline.com. You can also see the homepage has a slightly different URL than when we're using the Spring framework. So behind the scenes, I'm going to stop the Spring server and start up the Tomcat server. Please bear with me. While the Tomcat server is getting up and running, to talk a little bit more. So in the samples, you'll see that you have to build a WAR file when you're using Tomcat. And I did that offline. And so you'll see when you go to GitHub, we have all the instructions clearly laid out for you. Okay, it looks like Tomcat is up and running. I'm going to attempt. So let me change the screen I'm showing. So Tomcat is up and running. And as you can see, if you go to localhost 8080, we're going to Tomcat's homepage, as opposed to when we went to localhost 8080 for Spring, and we went straight to the website I was trying to show you. Now, like in the instructions, you need to navigate to this URL. As you can see, I am not signed in. And so this time, I'm just going to go straight to signing in. Same process as last time. Multi-factor authentication. One second, the Authenticator app is not prompting me yet. Okay, there we go. One thing to note, when you do this for the first time, you get presented a page that talks about app permissions and consent. What are you going to allow the app to access on your behalf? And the reason you're not seeing this is because I already granted these applications permission. But something to note, when you first run through the samples, you will get a page that talks about the permissions that you want to grant the app. In success, we are signed in with the ID token details. You can see we have some other claims that we didn't have when I was showing you Spring, but most of the same stuff. Issued by Microsoft, my name, object ID, preferred username. So I'm going to sign out, and I'm going to show you one more demo, this time using Oracle WebLogic. So we're still protecting the same Java servlet web app, but what I'm going to do now is start WebLogic server in the background. While WebLogic gets up and running, we have the steps, and I'll be showing you later when I go over through the GitHub organization, to make some modifications from the authentication.properties files I was just showing you with Tomcat. So I'm going to navigate back to Visual Studio Code. And so, like I was referring to earlier with Tomcat, you have to build a WAR file to run Tomcat and run WebLogic. And so to run those applications, that meant that I did have to change certain things. So after getting Tomcat to work, I had to change 8080 to 7001, but that's reflected in the WAR file that I built for WebLogic. And additionally, some other files that had to be changed, and we have these steps for you in our samples. Let me check on the status of WebLogic. It looks like WebLogic is now up and running. So no more 8080, we're going to 7001. I have a very creative username for my WebLogic. Okay, so again, in the interest of time, some of the things I took care of offline, but I'll show you what you'd have to do. So you see I already have my WAR up here, but basically, we also mentioned this in the instructions. You have to upload your WAR, and you have to hit install, and you'd select the path to the file, and then you would upload it, and then would create this. After that, in configuration, you go to control. So now I select my deployment. I click start servicing or requests. Okay, I'll give that a second. So now I'm going to navigate to our next page. Localhost 7001, MCell 4J servlet auth. And as I showed you the last two times, here's our homepage. Sign in. And in the interest of time, I'm going to stop here because it's the same process I've shown you twice. And after I get authenticated, you'd see my ID token details, and then I'd sign out. So what I want to do now is take you to our GitHub page. Microsoft Authentication Library for Java. So here's the homepage for the actual library. We cover installation, how to get the dependency Maven, and more. We also have a quick start for you if you want to get a very quick taste of what MCell is like for Java. See some of the steps that I mentioned before about putting in your app ID and client ID and running the code sample from wherever you're comfortable, an IDE or a project from Tomcat, and more. We also have a homepage, also known as our wiki, which gives you more of an overview of MCell Java, why to use it, learning about our supported scenarios, ways you can acquire token, and more. We also have a roadmap that shows you all our most recent releases. You click on any of these links, and you can see information about the release and the assets you need. Now, the main attraction are samples. So we've gotten a lot of feedback in the past about the lack of organization of our samples or the lack of wealth of our samples, and a little bit about the difficulty trying to integrate MCell Java using our samples. Our software engineers have been working extremely hard to make things way easier for you, and I'm here to present the new organization and the wealth of our samples. So for the homepage on our samples, we just talk about these scenarios, and as you can see here, the photos listed above give you a short summary of what they each entail. Going back to the top, I'm going to start with the Spring Framework Web App tutorial. Our tutorials are broken down into chapter-wise modules. So no matter where you are in the process, you can dive right in. If you've already set up everything from signing in with Azure AD all the way to acquiring an ID token with the roles claim, you can go straight to deploying to Azure App Service. If it's your first time, Trying to enable your web application to sign in users, well, you can go straight to signing in with Azure AD. This is the first sample that I demoed to you when I had the Spring web app running. Enable your Java Spring Boot web app to sign in users on your Azure Active Directory tenant with the Microsoft Identity Platform. We elaborate on the scenario, tell you the prerequisites, show you what you have to clone, and then like the steps I was talking about earlier, navigating to Azure portal to create your new application, entering the redirect URI, configuring the web app in a YAML file, where your YAML file is located in the sample you download, and some of the information that I had to change in the YAML file to connect my app to Azure AD. The commands for running the sample and the expected page you should see. Going to the serverless web apps. The same thing. Enable your Java serverless web app to sign in users and call APIs with the Microsoft Identity Platform. The prerequisites and the same chapter-wise module. On the call, I showed you sign in with Azure AD. Enable your Java serverless web app to sign in users to your Azure Active Directory tenant with the Microsoft Identity Platform. Overview, the scenarios, prerequisites, what you want to clone, and connecting your application to Azure AD. Now, no matter where your app is running, whether using Tomcat, JBoss, WebSphere, WebLogic, we have you covered. So as you can see here, after telling you how to build the WAR file using Maven, now you can pick where you want to deploy the sample. You just click on here. We have the instructions for running it on Apache Tomcat, running it on WebLogic, running it on JBoss EAP, or running it on WebSphere. We have more scenarios for you too. Client-side scenarios. Device code flow, integrated Windows auth flow, username password flow. Even if you weren't sure what these meant, we have a quick definition of them below. So for example, the device code flow. If you're trying to have someone get authenticated, that is, they're trying to sign in on a device that doesn't have the best user experience when typing, or there's just not a keyboard available at all. For example, you might have a smart TV or Internet of Things device like a smart speaker or printer. MSAL device code is for you. To give you another example, you can think of Hulu. If you're trying to log into Hulu on your TV, it will prompt you and send you to hulu.com/activate. It will then tell you, enter this 6-digit code on a browser on your phone or desktop or computer, whatever device that you have access to a browser on. Enter that 6-digit code, and now you're logged in on your TV. You have the instructions here. Invoking an API protected by Azure AD from a device without a browser for interaction. Scenarios, how to run the sample, registering the application to Azure AD tenant, all the steps, how to run the sample from wherever you're comfortable, and some information about the code. And lastly, we also have server-side scenarios, and many of them at that. Like on the client-side scenarios, showing you what each one entails. Let's look at the MSAL Web API sample. So, a Java Web API that calls another Web API with the Microsoft Identity Platform using the on behalf of flow. We have all the instructions laid out for you. No matter where you are, what scenario you're trying to enable, or your application is running, we have samples for you. So now I'm going to navigate back to the PowerPoint. MSAL Java is going to support you no matter where you are and what you're comfortable with. We support secure access to apps using Azure Active Directory and Azure Active Directory Business to Consumer. We support authentication of OpenID Connect using org ID or social accounts, supporting read end user roles, and group claims in hydrated security principle. We support authentication authorization access to Graph API, your REST APIs, or any Azure service. No matter where you're running your application, no matter what type of application you have, no matter what scenario you're trying to enable an identity, we have you covered. Please feel free to post in the chat any call to action, any sample you'd like to see that you didn't see today, any scenario you'd like to see enabled that you didn't see today. Thank you all so much for your time.
Awesome. That was brilliant. I mean, it was a very insightful session. It's great to know, you can use Java pretty much everywhere, and your session really put it out well with the demos, and good to see a lot of GitHub samples and detailed instructions. We have some questions in the chat, as well as we would like to take some more questions if you if you have any questions. The first question, Didun, is that they're asking for a sample that has a use case where Java is used to create a web API meant to interface front-end web apps to M365 data, specifically SPO data, via Microsoft Graph REST API. The ask is if we have a sample like that.
I believe you do, but I'm going to defer to Avery, software engineer that I work with all the time.
So we do have some web application samples and samples that involve you creating a web app with a secondary web API that you connect to. It doesn't mention like M365 specifically, but I'll put in chat all of our web app samples, so they should definitely be a good starting point for that.
Hope that answers your question, Starkey. The next question is, I think it's around acronyms. What is the acronym for service principal? Is it SPN, which it sounds like on-premises service principal name, but service principal isn't service principal name. So no N, therefore is it just SP, or is it SPO, service principal object?
Yeah, I think a lot of times when I'm in meetings and seeing people present about service principal, they normally have it typed out fully, so I can't speak too much on the acronyms that I've seen in the past. I do think it's really funny about you saying that the SharePoint folks would be angry if we made it SPO.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you. I pretty much I'm in line with what you're saying, Didun. All right. The next question is, are there any advantages to use MSAL on iOS instead of native libraries like AS Web Authentication?
Yeah, so I'm not too familiar with our iOS library, so I don't work in the iOS space at all, but I would say that the MSAL on iOS libraries for sure would have a lot of resources available to you. I can add the link to our MSAL iOS library in a second, but I would say that it's extremely informative when you navigate to their website. There are a ton of samples for you, and the team that works on it is extremely active. I've been in so many conversations about the MSAL and iOS team talking to Apple to constantly make sure that life is as easy as possible for them, even when using our libraries. And so that's how much I can speak on that, but I can't really talk too much about AS Web Authentication.
Shivshankar, let me try to get some more, I'll try to connect with the iOS team and try to get you some information. I'll try to put it in the chat. Maybe it may take a couple of days for me, but I'll have something for you. The next question is, in API or ID token validation, can you share / point out how can we use token signature validation?
I could also chime in a bit on that. So token validation and Priyan, you had a bunch of other questions. Token validation, continuous access evaluation, and POP token validation. Those are all features that we're going to be having soon, probably in this work quarter. or that we have planned for future work.
Got
So-
it. So,
So-
it's,
Can I talk, unmute and talk?
sure,
Yes,
sure.
please.
Please go ahead.
Yeah,
Feel free
Sure.
to.
So currently we are using ADAL, and ADAL we are using plain, JWT libraries to validate the token. So are you saying that if we migrate to MSAL, we cannot validate the token signature against Azure AD?
So you can validate the token signature using a separate library that we do a little bit of validation just for more like the formatting of stuff. But for signature validation, it's something that we're going to be having as a feature upcoming. But I think we hadn't been asked about it till kind of recently.
Yeah,
But
so
now-
the answer is no.
Yeah.
MSAL Java cannot validate the signature of the token. That means MSAL Java cannot make sure that the token is issued by Azure AD.
Yeah, currently it doesn't.
So even if we migrate the application, the web applications or web APIs, the other patterns like OBOs and everything to MSAL, the token signature validation part, still we have to use the other libraries, whatever we are currently using.
Yeah, we don't have it built in to MSAL Java right now.
Okay, fine, sure, thanks. My second question is about continuous access evaluation. So we saw and we are experienced that the .NET libraries are giving this continuous access evaluation, and we can actually do that authentication context. If we can request, if it is not there, we can again redirect. So that feature is also not available in MSAL Java, correct?
Yep, that is a feature that we started working on pretty recently, so we'll soon have the same features as .NET, but right now we don't.
Okay, same as for POP tokens as well. POP
Yep.
tokens.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, sure. Thanks. What about the ROPC? In our organization, we are using this resource owner password credential grant flow, and we are using ADAL. So MSAL still will support this ROPC flows. MSAL Java
We have that as our username password flow, ROPC flow. I'll put the link to our sample for that in chat.
With hybrid identities.
Yes, we have ROPC and integrated Windows authentication flow for hybrid identities, and they should work in ROPC as well. Yeah, so that's all supported.
Sure, thanks. That's all from my side.
Thanks for the questions, Priyan. Perfect. Did we have any more questions? It looks like we have covered all the questions in the chat. If you have any further questions, feel free to come off mute and ask them. We have our team here, the MSAL Java team. Okay, there's a question which, concerning existing server-side servlet apps with app servers, Tomcat, WebLogic, Web3, JBoss. For those scenarios where we have to migrate existing applications that use the Java EE security mechanisms, we have to remove the declarative elements or annotations like add servlet security and refactor the app to use MSAL for Java. Is that right? Question is from Oris.
Yeah, are you asking if going from Java EE to Java SE, are you saying, is that what your question is? Like how to sort of transfer to that, or?
Yeah, that's correct. Because I'm just considering a migration scenario. Let's say that I have a server-based application, WAR files and so on, servlets, Java server faces, anything, with the existing usual security mechanisms that are enforced, in a declarative way by the web XML file or the usual annotations, for security. In order to use MSAL for Java, if I got it right, I have to remove those configurations and then just, I would say, implement the functionality provided by MSAL for Java. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would either be MSAL handles the sort of getting and storing all of the tokens and setting up that side of things. For the security side of things, you could use Spring Security. We have some samples that show using that. Or if you're moving away from the sort of required security features of like Java EE to like Java SE, then yeah, you'd have to remove that and either use something like Spring Security, which is very popular, or like JDK itself has some built-in like security features.
Okay, all right, got you. Thank you very much.
So yeah, I have one final question.
Sure.
So in the Java MSAL, in .NET MSALs, we have seen during the web app flow, we are seeing a cookie called nouns cookie, and the final redirection, they are checking this nouns validation. So if I develop a Java with MSAL, a web app, is that the same flow that nouns cookie will be available and there will be a check against the nouns cookie present or not?
There are definitely scenarios where so if that like nonce value is in the token, then you'll still receive it because we'll be just receiving the same tokens that like .NET would receive. Currently, we don't really do anything with that like in the library because it's more meant for like any time that we would get it or deal with it, it's just use server side. So nothing that we do really messes with it, but if you're receiving that in like a token that .NET receives, you should be receiving the same information like in the tokens that MSAL Java receives.
Correct. My question is more related to the cookie. So what we see in the .NET application, MSAL sets the cookies after the authentication. One of the cookie that we see is a nouns cookie and something to do with ASP SSO state something. So like we have in .NET MSAL, do we have the same kind of concept or the implementation in Java, or is it like plain nouns validation? We'll get the token and we'll get the nouns value and we will validate the nouns value. Is it that way?
Yeah, we don't validate that side of things. For any of the cookies that we make for web apps, the library itself doesn't really set that information, but in our web app samples, part of the code is showing off storing like the token information in the session. So like, setting up the sort of like session cookies containing some of the token information or the user information. So that would probably be like the same thing if I'm understanding it right. Yeah, but I'm not really sure about like what .NET does with it. I'm not as familiar with them.
Okay, fine. Thanks. Yeah, .NET, from our experience, we have seen cookies, which is set using nouns value, and then the last redirection can happen only if that nouns value is present. That OWIN library is checking whether that nouns cookie is present or not. If not, it will go for a authentication. It will go for a redirection to authenticate again. But the same kind of flow, if you go to the network traffic, that's not available in MSAL Java.
Yeah, for us, like if we send you back to authenticate again, it's mostly for we mostly just check like if the token's expired or if it's missing, then we redirect users to authenticate again. We don't check for like specific nonce values. I think that's more used in like the either POP or continuous access valuation. We probably will start checking that, but for now we don't.
Thanks.
And it looks like Stephen has already answered Shiv Shankar's question on AS Web Authentication as and MSAL iOS. If you need any more clarification, feel free to come off mute, Shiv Shankar. If you're good with the answer, yeah, then you're good. All right. Okay. Thanks a lot, everyone, for your call. Thank you, Didun. Thank you, Avery, for the Q&A, the presentation. It was all great. Didun, did you have anything else to add? Avery, Didun?
A big thank you for your time and interacting with us.
Hey, folks, it would be great if you could go ahead and fill in the survey for us. This really helps us to sort of like plan our sessions. The questions are more around what you would like and how was this current session and things like that. It would not take more than a minute for you to sort of fill in the survey. Yeah, it would be great if you could take a minute and do that for us. So just to recap, you will be getting access to this videos, m365pnp/videos. You can follow the Twitter as well as the Azure, like the Twitter channels, Microsoft 365 Dev and Azure AD for the recording or the next calls and all that. We have an exciting call coming up for you on May 19th. Looking forward to having you all on that call. Thank you.